Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 5th of June, 2024, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me today by the video link, we have Vanessa Beeley from Damascus and Charles Malet. Welcome to the programme, both. We're going to get started with, well, something which should be part of the election debate. So let's bring the two buffoons on screen. They were on ITV last night. Now, I didn't watch the entire thing by any means, but I'm going to say this is a great example of why we need more independence in the House of Commons. So hashtag Independence Day is what we're arguing for, because, of course, they talked about economy, they talked about immigration, but they didn't talk about the war danger at the moment, which, of course, they are both banging the drums for. Now, just to put this in a bit of context, here is a tweet from US Senator. This is Senator James Vance, and he has written on his Twitter account yesterday that Biden is sleepwalking into World War III. I just spoke to a friend. I trust in what's going on in Russia. I think the risk of nuclear war now is higher than at any point in my lifetime. Biden is sleepwalking into World War III. And then under that, he has a Politico article linked. The article is called War Has Found Them. Biden's Ukraine gamble sets a new course. And the Politico article says, despite his best efforts, President Joe Biden has plunged the US deeper into the fight in Ukraine. Soon Ukraine will be using US-made weapons to strike inside Russia, a nuclear-armed power with US President's blessing. President Joe Biden's choice to cross the line on striking inside Russian territory is likely to lead to pressure to go further. Now, RT then has published this article from Fyodor Lukyanov. He's works for various think tanks and so on. Russia needs to explain its red lines to the West. What he's saying in this article is, well, I'll just quote a little bit from the final paragraph. It says, what do you do in such a situation? And he's talking about the Ukraine situation and Western weapons being used in this way. The time for strategic ambiguity is over, he says, as is the increasingly ritualized talk of red lines. At the very least, Russia needs to be very clear about the steps it will take in response to NATO's actions. Vagueness only encourages flip-flopping and fosters a sense of impunity. And I think last week, Vanessa, I was saying on this program that Russia has been incredibly patient as this whole scenario has built. Somebody in the chat box last week was saying, yes, but that patience appears to be running out. And Lukyanov here is saying very clearly, it's time for Russia to be very explicit about what the dangers are that the West is playing with. And I think these are all good points.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was an article, I think, that I sent you about a week ago where another analyst was basically saying it's time for Russia to set off a nuclear explosion as a warning, in a contained explosion as a warning to the West, and to remind them what a mushroom cloud entails, basically, because we're a generation that hasn't experienced the likes of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and all the various nuclear test explosions that went on around that time. So, yeah, very clear messages from Russia right now.
Absolutely. And so what's the response? Because not every country is behaving in the same way. So here's Hungary yesterday. And people out protesting on the streets, calling for peace, not war, and quite a parade going on. If you look at the various video footage on this, thousands and thousands and thousands of people on the streets. Viktor Orban made a speech around the same time. So let's just have a brief listen to this.
Falon. A magyarok ismerik a háború természetét. Tudják, a háború mindig másképpen végződik, mint ahogyan kezdetben elgondolták. Ezért fekszenek ma európai fiatalok milliói tömegsírokban. Ezért nincs elég európai ember, ezért nincs elég európai gyerek. A háború öl. Valaki fegyverrel a kézben hal meg. Valaki menekülés közben. valaki bombázásban, valaki az ellenség börtönében, valaki járványban, valaki éhen hal, van, akit megkínoznak, van, akit megerőszakolnak, van, akit elvisznek rabszolgának. Számolatlanul sorakozó sírok, fiaikért zokogó anyák, férjeiket sirató nők, meg annyi odaveszett élet. Egy dolgot tudunk, ahová a háború beteszi a lábát, ott nincs menekvés. A háború utolér. Nem tudsz kitérni, nem tudsz elbújni előle. A háború egyetlen ellenszere a béke. Kimaradni a háborúból, és a béke szigeteként megőrizni Magyarországot. Ez a mi küldetésünk.
So, Charles, the only antidote to war is peace. And I'm going to say, well, first of all, what are your thoughts on that?
Good afternoon, all. Thanks, Mike. Well, I don't think I want to overcomplicate matters by disagreeing with any of what he said. I think he's absolutely right, and so-called leaders across the West should pay attention to every single word that he's said.
Yes, absolutely. So if we bring these two back on screen again, these two, neither of these two is going to bring us into a world of peace. And so none of us should be voting for either of them or for either of the parties, in my opinion. Let's vote for some alternatives, whether it be independence, which is what we would recommend, but there are others in some of the smaller parties that might have a bit more sanity about them. Okay, let's come back to the UK then, domestic issues, and the issue of so-called extremism, Charles.
Yes, this has been a recurring theme throughout the year, but in January and March of this year, we reported on the case of Sam Melia, associated with the Patriotic Alternative, who was imprisoned for a couple of offences, which we'll go into in a minute. But here we see it being reported on the Patriotic Alternative website that he has now been prevented from seeing or having any contact or any communication with or about his children. Now, I spoke to his wife, Laura Towler, earlier this week, and I'm just going to play a short clip of her explaining what has happened.
In Hull, for the first week, everything was fine. We had a visit with the kids, speaking to him on the phone, no problems at all. And then all of a sudden, letters and emails started getting rejected and sent back to us, saying child protection issues. And to cut a long story short, because it's been this big kerfuffle over the last couple of weeks, basically they've classified Sam as a PPRC, which is a person posing risk to children. And when I asked them to clarify why Sam had been classified as a PPRC, they said, and I quote, racist literature, insignia and books, and racist and offensive attitudes. So that's why he's a risk to children, apparently. So they've stopped contact with his children. Not only that, but he's not allowed any photographs of his children, and I'm not even allowed to mention his children to him on the phone. If I do that, they can ban me as a contact. So I can kind of understand the contact thing. Completely disagree with it. He's not a risk to his kids. His daughter's 1 month old and 2 years old. He can't brainwash them into racism or whatever. But I can kind of understand the contact thing, even though it's wrong. But I don't understand why he's not allowed photographs of them, or why I'm not allowed to mention them to him, because how is he going to brainwash a child down a photograph?
Laura ends with a very, very good question. Now, I've been in touch with HMP Hull to ask more about this, and they say that they may be able to reply within 20 days. So we'll just have a quick look at what Laura had posted on Telegram, specifically just to reinforce what she's talking about, and particularly the use of the very confusing language about, first of all, posing a risk of serious harm to children, but also saying that it does not state that he does pose a direct risk of serious harm to children. But as she says, through the children being exposed to posters, insignia, literature and attitudes. Now, is this ineptitude or malice? Bearing in mind that the offences were publishing with intent to stir up racial hatred, even though it was never proven that any was stirred up, or indeed that the intent really was there, and encouraging the racially aggravated criminal damage of sticking stickers. So just to look further into where this sort of action comes from the prison service, the Public Protection Manual has a section on PPRC, person posing risk to children. And bearing in mind he'd already spent 3 months in Leeds, is it really appropriate? Potential PPRCs must be identified quickly and risk assessed to establish if there is a continuing risk to children. So it looks very much like the prisoner not fulfilling these criteria, but specifically on the photograph side of it, just to give an indication of whether or not this is proportionate. PPRCs or potential PPRCs presenting a sexual risk to children must have access to their personal photographs as children considered using the principles in this chapter. So this is the sort of threshold that's being dealt with. And last week I spoke about the Walney report and specifically the targeting, or at least the identification of lone actors. And it looks like not only is Sam Melia being used as an example in terms of his imprisonment, his conviction, but also now his status as a prisoner for these particular offences, which of course are associated with nationalism, which the CPS was very keen to suggest was criminal, that he might be cast as one such lone actor. But we'll just look also at the European Convention on Human Rights, because although it might seem a bit extreme, the Article 3, of course, refers to prohibition of torture. No one shall be subjected to torture or to inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment. And that should really be considered, but specifically, really Article 8, where everyone has the right to respect for his private and family life, his home and his correspondence. And it continues that there shall be no interference by a public authority with the exercise of this right, except in the interests of national security, public safety, or the economic well-being of the country, for the prevention of disorder or crime, or for the prevention of protection of health or morals. So it's a great stretch to see how the prison service could justify these measures. A challenge has been made, and hopefully something will come of it. Now, if you're outraged by this, not specifically necessarily sympathising with the beliefs or the ideologies of Sam Melia, but indeed recognising that he is a political prisoner and has fallen foul of the most corrupt system, there is a petition at change.org. The link will be in the show notes, which only has around 3,000 signatures at the minute. So that's something that really should see a significant uplift. And the other thing I should point out is that on the Patriotic Alternative website, if you go to the news section, you can see how to either register a complaint with HMP Hull or to get in touch with Sam. And I should just point out it's his birthday on Sunday, the 9th of June, and he would very much appreciate written correspondence.
Thank you, Charles. And Vanessa, let's come on to you and the Clooney Foundation.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. The Clooney Foundation has been suddenly thrown into the limelight with a bit of controversy. The Amal and George Clooney Foundation for Justice, Waging Justice for Human Rights. One of the sectors of the foundation, the docket, is run by the legal director, Anya Nestat. Let's just move on where I've highlighted part of her actual CV. So she was with Amnesty International as their senior director for research. She was the associate director for program and emergencies at Human Rights Watch. She was the chair of the board at Crisis Action. So very clearly somebody that's embedded in organizations that have a revolving door with the US State Department and intelligence agencies. And here, very recently, she had a dig at President Assad with the claim that French magistrates had issued an arrest for the Syrian president. So let's see what she said in an interview towards the end of May. The Clooney Foundation, she said in an interview, seeks criminal prosecution of Russian advocates. This was picked up by the RT, Sputnik, TASS, etc. But let's have a look at the RT version of the report on this. The Clooney Foundation are lunatics, said the Kremlin. The organization has previously proposed issuing secret warrants for media figures over alleged incitement to genocide in Ukraine, We should also bear in mind, of course, that this in a way is a spin-off from the Center of Disinformation established by the then US administration, and which led to the term disinformation terrorists, which was picked up then by the various Ukrainian NATO-managed kill lists. So basically, within the RT article, she declined to disclose the names of individuals. She wants to target explaining that we want them to travel to other countries and to be arrested there. She also makes very clear that she has a definite conflict of interest as she feels personally involved in the Ukrainian conflict, obviously on the side of Ukraine and NATO member states. So what I'm trying to point out here is a very odd sequence of events, because then what happened? There is an economic forum being organized in St. Petersburg, to which a number of Western commentators and analysts have been invited, including Judge Napolitano, who has his own YouTube channel, and Scott Ritter, who is known to most people, of course, former US Navy intelligence officer involved in putting out the declaration that there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Now, the strange thing here is that initially, so Scott Ritter, who was pulled off the plane to Russia on his way from New York to Istanbul, and from Istanbul, he would be going to St. Petersburg, and he had his passport confiscated by Homeland Security officers. At the time, Sputnik, RT, all of the Russian media put out a story that Napolitano had same treatment. However, let's just, because that was later updated, and Napolitano said he was given a message by Ritter to warn him not to go to Russia because the sponsor of the two of them, or of the organization, had been arrested inside Russia. So let's just have a look at a part of the exchange between the two.
Plane, and suddenly three uniformed, armed Customs and Border Patrol officers came up and asked if I was, William Scott Ritter Jr. I said, yes, I am. They ushered me out of the line. Then they demanded that I give them my passport, which I complied with. And then they asked me that if this was my only travel document, do I have any other travel documents? I said, no, this is my U.S. passport. It's the passport I use to travel overseas, and I have used frequently, including to Russia. And they said, well, we're seizing it. And I said, on what authority? They said, on the orders of the United States State Department. I said, who in the State Department? They said, we don't know. I said, well, who ordered you to do this? So you obviously are, we don't know. We can't tell you. We're not authorized to tell you. They wouldn't give me a receipt for the passport. They just said, you got to contact the State Department.
And of course, they violated their own profound regulations by not giving you a receipt. They're supposed to give you a receipt so that when you sue them, the court will know who it is that took this away from you. Now you're going to have to do some investigation on your own. The State Department is huge. Was this Tony Blinken? Was this Jake Sullivan? Or was this some local functionary who didn't like something they heard you say?
So obviously, I mean, this is a violation of various amendments on freedom of speech, freedom of travel, etc. The fact that Ritter actually forgot in the fluster to take the names of the officers or to ask for a receipt for the passport is obviously going to lead to some issues, one assumes, in the future. But what's really strange is that almost simultaneously, or just after Ritter had basically announced that he had been prevented traveling, George Clooney put out this announcement on Twitter saying that in regard to recent reports about Russian journalists, someone in our foundation misspoke. I'm the son of a journalist. We at the Clooney Foundation would never go after journalists, even if we disagree with them. In fact, we have a long track record of protecting journalists. Now, people will know Clooney from his activity as Barack Obama's point man in Darfur in Sudan. If you remember, he was going to make a movie about the CIA MI6 creation, the White Helmets in Syria, etc. So he has a long history of being fairly heavily embedded with the State Department and intelligence agencies. And this caught my eye when I was flicking through the Clooney Foundation X page, sorry, not Twitter. Here they mention somebody that they're working in collaboration with, particularly on Ukrainian alleged war crimes committed, of course, by Russia, not by Ukraine. It's an organization called Truth Hounds. So I had a quick look at the website, and I do advocate everyone going to look. It's a very odd website. It reminds me of those kind of cutout websites that we used to see during the regime change war in Syria, that to me are very often basically intelligence front pages. But I had a quick look at basically who their sponsors are. You have the US State Department and you have the National Endowment for Democracy, which of course again is known as being an outreach agency for the intelligence agencies, particularly working abroad in infiltration exercises. And then let's have a look at the media companies that they work with. Of course, there you have the usual suspects, CNN, BBC, The Guardian, and then just quickly moving on to the NGOs that they work with, and you'll see again that crossover. Human Rights Watch, as I said, revolving door with the US State Department and the CIA, and of course, as I mentioned, the Clooney Foundation. And the one point that I want to make, a legal director within the foundation doesn't misspeak over a campaign of such gravitas and importance. I think that's absolute nonsense. So looking at the timing, I find it extremely odd that at this stage, Clooney suddenly decided to step in and retract this campaign of targeting journalists, both Russian and Western, who are speaking out against the war in Ukraine.
And Vanessa, this is another great example of someone that has a personal profile, a public profile, rather of being an actor and so on. But he's married to someone who's a lawyer, I believe, KC. And what I'm a bit not quite clear about was because she put her name to an article in the FT recently, along with a bunch of other KCs and judges with respect to Gaza. And so what are the games that they're playing here? Because I seem to remember her name coming up quite a lot with respect to Syria as well.
Yeah, absolutely. In the FT article, of course, what that letter actually still claims is that Hamas committed the atrocities that have been 100% debunked by analysts since October the 7th, so that they're maintaining the Hamas atrocity narrative that defends Israel, of course, and basically justifies the genocide, the ongoing genocide. But also there was an interesting article in Mondovas, which is Hebrew media, opinion media, where they actually said that the ICC arrest warrant had actually played in Netanyahu's favor. In other words, he could now play the anti-Semitic card. He could play the card that they were being victimized and put on the same level as Hamas terrorists. And actually, his popularity has increased since the ICC arrest warrant. So an interesting perspective to bring into that.
Yes, okay. Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you for that. Okay, if you like what the UK column does, you'd like to continue doing it, we do need your support. So if you can possibly help us out, the website to go to is support.ukcolumn.org. The options to help us out are there. You can get a membership for as little as £5 a month. If you can't do that, but can help us in other ways, please do share material you find on the various platforms. We don't have a Facebook page that's active at the moment, so if you are on Facebook, please share our material there, because Facebook has been a driver for people coming to the website and so on. So if you can possibly share material on Facebook, that would be great. You could also pick something up at the UK Column shop. There are plenty of items there to have a look at. Now, tomorrow at 1 p.m, the third episode of the new series of The Health Revolution with Clive DeCar will be going out live, at 1 p.m. tomorrow for premiere. And we're answering some more questions again, similar to the first episode. So do join us for that. And the interview that went out yesterday with Danny Hervé from Guernsey is up on the website now. And if you haven't seen that one yet, please have a look at that and do share it. The Sunday event, Sunday the 16th of June. Vanessa's photograph is on there, but actually I'm not sure that I've actually asked her to take part in that. We can talk about this in extra and she can tell me.
Yes, you have.
Okay. Well, anyway, so UK Column Live, do join us for this on Sunday the 16th of June, starting at 10 a.m. And another reminder of the Sounds Beautiful Festival taking place at in Wimborne and Dorset on the 27th to the 30th of June. UK Column will be there as well, so come and join us for that. Now, let's move on then to the issue of the NHS. And well, yesterday it was announced that the NHS was coming under cyber attack. So let's bring SYNLAP on screen. And SYNLAP is the company who was providing the service to the NHS that has been attacked. SYNLAP is, well, it's a joint venture, as we'll see in a second. Synnovis is the company that's behind all this, or at least Synnovis is the joint venture. Sorry, SYNLAP is the company that's behind all this. Synnovis is a partnership between SYNLAP UK and Ireland, Guy's and St Thomas NHS Foundation Trust, and King's College Hospital NHS Foundation Trust. Our organisation brings together the very best in clinical, scientific and operational expertise, is what they say, but not apparently IT expertise, as we'll see in a couple of seconds when Charles continues this. But they issued a statement with respect to the cyber attack, which said Synnovis, a partnership between two London hospital-based trusts, and SYNLAP was the victim of a ransomware cyber attack. So this is where so-called cyber criminals managed to get some software on your systems which encrypts the data on your systems, and then they hold you to ransom, so you've got to pay them some Bitcoin in order to get the data released again. This has the effect, they said, this has affected all Synnovis IT systems, resulting in interruptions to many of our pathology services. It's still early days, and we're trying to understand exactly what has happened. A task force of IT experts from Synnovis and the NHS is working to fully assess the impact this has had and to take the appropriate action needed. Regrettably, this is affecting patients, with some activity already cancelled or redirected to other providers as urgent work is prioritised. We're incredibly sorry for the inconvenience and upset this is causing to patients, service users and anyone affected. The incident is being reported to law enforcement and the Information Commissioner, and we're working with the National Cyber Security Centre and the Cyber Operations Team. And they went on to say, we will share further updates as we know more, but regret we are unable to respond to individual queries from the media at this time. So thank you for your understanding. Now, this is the man in charge, Mark Dollar. I believe you do know this, gent, Charles.
From the dim and distant past, yes, we began the process of joining the army at the same time. So his background is not in this field at all. But I don't have an awful lot more to say on whether or not he's capable of getting out of this hole.
Yes. Okay. So let's come back onto the statement from Synnovis.
Yes, I think the critical part, really, and the lesson to be taken from this is, whilst there are, of course, serious consequences for all the people that were affected specifically by this and the sort of the health implications, really what I want to do is to use this as an effective case study. And of course, the critical part really is that they describe themselves as having invested heavily in ensuring our IT arrangements are as safe as they possibly can be. Now, the lesson to learn from that is that they can never be safe. There does not seem to be a single mode of technology or any sort of digital platform which doesn't succumb ultimately to some sort of invasion like this. And therefore, this should be borne in mind, specifically with regard to consideration of identity and currency and the obsession, really, that the system has, the establishment has, with digitizing absolutely everything. This should be a very stark reminder of the frailty of these systems. Now, we'll look a little bit wider because fraud is such a big issue now, accounting for nearly half of all crime in the UK. So the BDO fraud report has come out for the last year, and we're just going to go through some of it. Before we do, I should just point out that the business of investigating and protecting against fraud is not a bad one to be in. The fee income of all BDO firms, including the members of their exclusive alliances, was $14 billion as of September 2023. However, that to one side, in their fraud report, and this specifically concentrates on the UK, they say that in 2023, 2.3 billion of fraud was far below the 2021 figure of 10 billion, largely due to the massive level of fraud linked to the government support schemes during the COVID-19 pandemic. So again, I just reinforce the message that when it comes to trusting the government to manage a digital system properly, we should not be presenting that trust to them. They do not deserve it. Anyway, the BDO report goes on specifically with cybercrime, and of course the sort of current thing being AI. And of course, this is where we discover quite what a double-edged sword it is, because they talk about AI picking up momentum and blurring the lines between what is real and what is fake. Whilst AI-enabled technology can provide revolutionary methods to conduct business, it does also, unfortunately, create a host of new opportunities for AI-powered scams. Now, I think that would have been fairly obvious to anybody who'd given it due consideration, but nonetheless, that is the sort of cyber part of it. The other part of sort of, let's say, more conventional fraud is now apparently being dealt with by government in slow time, but the result of the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act of 2022 has brought about the offence of failure to prevent fraud. So we're just going to have a quick look at what that means. And essentially, it's to target businesses if they profit from fraud committed by their employees. Effectively, it's making sure that the organisation, even if it's unaware of it, has responsibility for the activities of employees. So under the new offence, an organisation will be liable where a specified fraud offence is committed by an employee or an agent for the organisation's benefit, and the organisation did not have reasonable fraud prevention procedures in place. It does not need to be demonstrated that company bosses ordered or knew about the fraud. Now, on the company bosses side of things, it is worth pointing out that company bosses will not be liable for any offences on this failure to prevent fraud, because they're deemed to be not, in effect, responsible if they didn't know. So that's something that in due course probably will require a degree more scrutiny. The other thing that's being very much scrutinised now is Companies House part in all of this, and they report just last week that they're making progress on implementing the reforms that are brought about by this legislation, in particular on the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act. Sorry, I misspoke, 2023 it is, not 22. Reforms of Companies House processes and new statutory functions and objectives for the registrars, reforms of laws that apply to limited partnerships, and new provisions relating to the register of overseas entities. So this should really be significant, but it remains to be seen how Companies House will actually deal with it. And indeed, House of Commons Library putting this out again from last week in terms of what can be done and how the register is corrected. Identity verification, a large part of it, and what exactly is or is not deemed to be correct. So the registrar carries out the checks, and she has limited powers to verify or validate the information which is delivered to her. I think it's a common misconception that Companies House has had a responsibility to date to be able to do that. But they go on to say, provided a document appears to be properly delivered, the registrar must register it. So that's the system by which Companies House operates at the moment. And we'll just go on a little bit further to say that the registrar will now be given broader powers under the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act, so she can become a more active gatekeeper over company registrations. This will include powers to check, challenge and refuse to register any information which is inaccurate or false, whilst also ensuring any fraudulent addresses can be removed more easily. So there's a lot to consider there, and whether or not this is actually going to have any effect at all, it's far too early to tell, but nonetheless, Companies House do appear to be doing something about it, and when there is publication of data to give any sort of feedback in terms of metrics of success, I will, of course, report on that.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you. Now, Vanessa, let's go back to the Middle East. And what's going on in southern Lebanon? And is it all about Hezbollah?
Not really. I mean, of course, what is Hezbollah doing? It's trying to basically contain the Israeli army in the northern occupied territories so that there isn't a full-on assault on Gaza, apart, of course, from what we've seen. Israel has been sort of crying wolf for some time over an invasion into southern Lebanon. These are just some of the statements put out by Yoav Gallant, the war minister. Basically, he's talking about copy-pasting the Gaza war to Beirut. We'll return Lebanon to the Stone Age. If Hezbollah wants to go up one level, we'll go up 5. And quite recently, Gallant made the statement that, or rather, he warned of a potential hot summer in the north as Hezbollah attacks an IDF post. And in reality, what have we seen? We've seen really a very big increase or in intensity of the conflict in northern occupied territories with Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, and massive fires across the upper Galilee occupied areas. Where you'll see the North sees more sirens and fires. Just a couple of pictures of the fires that are basically raging throughout that upper Galilee region, causing untold damage from attacks by Hezbollah that have not been intercepted largely by the various air defense systems that the Israelis always boast of. Hezbollah attacks scorched nearly 2,500 acres of northern Israel. And if we just look into details very quickly there, 30 firefighting teams were deployed to extinguish the flames. As a result of the fires, major roads in the Galilee remain shuttered. 990 acres of land were burned near Amiad, and it continues. There is, of course, outrage now that effectively people are claiming in this area that the Israeli regime is not responding to the tragedy that's unfolding for them in the northern occupied territories. And then very interesting, so we have the increase in rhetoric of a potential invasion of southern Lebanon. We've had this morning, which I couldn't report in time, but there was an alleged ISIS attack on the US embassy in Beirut, which of course makes me immediately think that's a pretext for the US to increase military presence in Beirut under the justification of fighting ISIS, which is of course the proxy terrorist group in Syria and Iraq. This is in Israeli media. I think yesterday I crossed out Hezbollah because it was warning given to, one assumes, diplomatic representatives in Beirut by or via diplomatic channels by the British, warning of a mid-June Israeli onslaught. Now, in my opinion, we're not looking at a ground invasion. That's already been a disaster for the Israeli forces in Gaza. In my opinion, what we will see, at least initially, is an increase in attacks deeper into Lebanese territory, potentially in Beirut itself, targeting, of course, hospitals, civilians, and so on, as they've done in Gaza in an attempt to put pressure on Hezbollah to withdraw.
Yes, okay, thank you for that. Now, here's the Telegraph, and they were pushing this article out yesterday. The NATO maps out plan to block Russian invasion. Pre-planned logistical routes could help stave off a potential Russian attack. So we're preparing for war here. Here's the Mail. Revealed NATO plan to get US troops to the front line to fight Russia. Alliance prepares for rapid deployment of American soldiers amid fears Moscow is plotting major war with Europe. And the impression that you're left with these articles and others of its type is that this is all a NATO initiative and that this is something new. But if you've been watching the UK column for a lot of years, you'll know that there's nothing new about this at all. So let's just bring the map on screen and we can see the routes that they're talking about. And this is all about military mobility. And we've been talking about military mobility for many, many years here at the UK column, because this is part and parcel of the of the European Union Defence Union project. So here's Federica Mogherini going back to 2018 here. And she was already talking back then about the next steps on the military mobility action plan. So if you're in any doubt about the fact that they've been planning for exactly this scenario for many, many years, You can put those doubts aside. If we put that back on screen again for a second, this is something for 2019. The announcement that 22 member states of the EU, that's Austria, Belgium, Bulgaria, Croatia, Cyprus, Czech Republic, Estonia, France, Greece, Hungary, Italy, Latvia, Lithuania, Luxembourg, Malta, the Netherlands, Poland, Portugal, Romania, Slovakia, Spain and Sweden, and the European Defence Agency signed a new programme that implements a major part of the Action Plan on Military Mobility, allowing free cross-border surface and air movement of personnel and equipment. And this was all part of the European Defence Union project. You've seen this, or at least many people have seen this graphic quite a number of times. This is from the European Commission themselves, although it's our version of it. And you can see on the right-hand pillar here, they consider a core partnership to be NATO and another core partnership to be the United Nations. But NATO has always been a part of this entire project. And then coming back to 2019, this was Violetta Bulc, the EU Transport Commissioner at the time. But let me now come back to my main topic, the Action Plan on Military Mobility. This was adopted at the end of March by the European Commission and the EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy. And she said it was developed in the context of our President's commitment during his State of the Union speech in September 2017 to have a full-fledged defence union in place by 2025. So this has to be seen in this context. The EU has been stalled on many occasions in their efforts to get this defence union in place. So, if you think of all the various sub-unions that they have in terms of banking union and monetary union and various other types of unions, this was just another one of those, and so on. So let's bring the current High Representative, the so-called Foreign Minister of the European Union, on screen. And of course, the Military Mobility Project was part of PESCO, and led by the Netherlands, provides the right platform, he said, after the US, Canada and Norway joined last year. The UK's participation is yet another proof of the importance of this project. So the UK is part of this as well, as we always said it would be. So there we are. Now, if you want to know the history of this, you have a look at this page on the UK Column website on EU military unification. There's a full timeline here which describes the process that has built this infrastructure over the last lot of years, and actually about 30 or 35 articles, I think, on this topic. So go and have a look at this because it is absolutely key to appreciate that everything that we're seeing happening today and all the plans that are in place today have been being built over many, many years. And Charles, the point I would make here very strongly is that we have been talking about this for years. And I believe we're the only media organisation in the UK that has been talking about the building of the European Defence Union and the implications that has for putting pressure on Russia. It certainly has never been discussed in the mainstream media at any level of detail. So that is a pretty unique topic in the UK for British media, at least.
It is. I hope that does two things, which is first of all to confirm to people who listen to and watch UK Column that they're doing the right thing by following us, because exactly as you say, this has received no coverage at all. I think also it serves as a good reminder that these sorts of things to coordinate to achieve that degree of sort of willingness to cooperate and the rest of it does take an awfully long time, but also it requires, on the information side of it, it requires a very cohesive narrative to keep effectively telling everybody that Russia is a threat, that Russia intends to do this, regardless of what Russia actually does or says. And I think that's the other main thing to draw out of this is the ground that can be gained, perhaps not literally, but what can be done with just the suggestion of something happening or indeed not happening.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Charles. Now, Vanessa, let's come back to you. And, another attack by Israel on Syria.
Yes, actually, the third attack in, May coming into June. But this one is significant, and bearing in mind, of course, as we've talked about, the potential of escalation against Lebanon, and of course, any war against Lebanon will definitely bring Syria into the fray. But this was in the early hours of the morning. I think it was 12:20. on the 3rd of June, Israeli warplanes using Jordanian airspace and then the airspace over the illegal US military base in Al Tanf, which is shaded in grey there on the border with Jordan. They entered at very low altitude to avoid radar detection to the southeast of Aleppo city in the north of Syria there, and fired, I think it was 13 missiles hitting 6 targets to the north of Aleppo city itself in an area there called Fayan, which included the destruction of civilian infrastructure. And if we can just move on, I actually wrote an account of what happened at my Substack. 15 people were injured. The majority of those were civilians. 17 were killed. And that included another senior Iranian IRGC commander and advisor to Syria, Haj Saeed Abia, who was buried in Damascus the day after. Now, of course, the Syrian Ministry of Foreign Affairs has said that this is a flagrant violation of our country's sovereignty. We will not stand idly by as the Israeli regime continues to carry out such reckless and deadly attacks. Moscow also sort of gravely condemned the attack, as it always does, saying, of course, that it will destroy regional stability, as it does. And so I think, what we've seen is certainly since the beginning of May, we've seen another increase in Israeli activity in targeting areas in Syria, but particularly trying to decimate Syria's ability to defend itself. So in my opinion, as it has been for some time, Israel is, one, trying to provoke Syria into an escalation, but also it's trying to destroy its defense and offense capability if there were to be an escalation. And if the plans for escalation, I think there were 50,000 reservists called up today with the potential of increasing military activity in Rafah, in Gaza, but also in the northern occupied territories against Lebanon. So we'll wait and see.
Okay, brilliant. And Charles, let's come back to you then. And agriculture and seeds.
Thanks, Mike. Yes, and indeed they're a very significant part in food security, which of course we've talked about within the context of the United Kingdom very much this year. We're now going to look further afield, but very much with an eye on what's going on here. So we see a report from Relief Web about what they're calling Kenya's seed control battle, why smallholder farmers want to share indigenous seeds. Now, this does go back for sort of over the course of some years, but it's not going away. And Kenya farmers, regarding what's happening, which is effectively the Seed Act taking away their ability to use indigenous seeds. They're talking about it as exploitation by multinational seed breeders. And another farmer saying that seed sharing is an old age tradition passed on from our forefathers. Unlike certified seeds, the use of indigenous seeds is cost effective as it does not require the use of chemical-based inputs. And indeed, there's more on this going back a couple of years from Greenpeace, who have been very active on this. But they highlight, of course, that 90% of the seeds planted in Kenya are from informal seed systems. And I think we could take that as being a figure that would apply across all of Africa, if not much of the rest of the world. And critically here, 80% of smallholder farmers depend on informal seed systems, which include sharing seeds with other farmers. Denying these farmers the right to use their indigenous seeds is a theft of the biological resources, which will translate to low food production, leading to food insecurity. And that really is the key to this. So this comes from, in the case of Kenya, the 2012 Seeds and Plant Varieties Act. Now, they talk about the theft from essentially their sort of indigenous practices. So the question is, therefore, who is conducting this theft? Who is engaged in these sorts of operations and trying to disrupt a system that has been in place for a long time? Well, let me introduce you to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation Agricultural Innovations, Gates Ag 1, it's called. And rather than listen to me describe it, I've got a short video from their website describing what it is that they're planning to do in Africa.
Progress starts here. Growth starts here. Resilience starts here. Smallholder farms and the seeds planted on them share a lot in common. Support them and they will thrive. Equip them and they strengthen everything around them. And yet, this potential is still largely unrealized. Bill and Melinda Gates Agricultural Innovations was set up to bridge this gap with the mission of a non-profit and the agility of a startup accelerator. We call ourselves Gates Ag One because agriculture is at the intersection of the most pressing issues affecting humanity today, and smallholder farmers can be important agents of change all over the world if given the right tools and support. We use our unique convening power and patient capital to develop breakthrough crop transformations that reach and benefit smallholder farmers. Breakthroughs like improved photosynthesis, nitrogen fixation, and carbon cycling. Improving plant biology alongside pest and disease resistance and weed control offers the potential for solutions that are renewable, affordable, and scalable. Design, build, test, repeat. There is no time to lose. Join us.
There we are, Gates Ag One, with a masterful display of saying one thing and really meaning another. But they're certainly not the only people who are in on this. It's, of course, something that's been considered by many other organisations with deep pockets and a desire to change the existing system of things. But we'll just look at the committed grant from the Gates Foundation. This goes back to 2012, of course, 56 million boost to increase food crops. Cambridge University have been given $35 million to boost production sustainability in sub-Saharan Africa. Indeed, the Rockefeller Foundation, of course, have an alliance for a green revolution in Africa. And again, the Rockefeller Foundation here specifically saying they support a uniquely African green revolution to improve smallholder farm productivity while preserving the environment. Now, this is the thing, the incessant targeting of the smallholder, which has prompted the Scientific American to put forward what seems to be a completely reasonable point of view, which is that Bill Gates should stop telling Africans what kind of agriculture Africans need. That's going back to 2021. But why exactly is he, and indeed the Rockefellers or anybody else, trying to do this? And this is from Mordor Intelligence, the latest on the projections in the world seed market. So we see at the moment, 2024, valued at around $73 billion a year. That's projected to go up to $100 billion by 2030. It might well be more than that. Now, that, of course, is why people are interested. The other thing that I should make clear here is that the type of seeds that they're talking about creating and selling are seeds that have in some way been modified. And therefore, we heard earlier about the necessity for chemical inputs. It also means that they're likely to be sold as being drought resistant or pest resistant. But that, in large part, is going to mean that digestibility by the human body is going to be greatly inferior. We see also in the literature from African farmers saying that these sorts of seeds are going to be very unlikely to be suited to the African conditions and will require huge cost inputs. But in Norway, in Svalbard in Norway, you may be aware that there is a seed vault there where effectively heirloom seeds that have not been adulterated are kept from all over the world in case of such a situation where there needs to be effectively the requirement to be able to start sort of seeds from scratch again. And you'd think, therefore, given the hybrid nature of what we've been talking about, that these people would have nothing to do with it. But of course, that's actually not the case. And here we see Bill Gates on LinkedIn saying that he's really enjoyed the virtual tour of the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. So it seems slightly odd that he would be involved with that. But lo and behold, back in 2007, he actually gave it some money. So why would he be interested in that? And then just quickly to round off, I point towards the Genetic Technology Precision Breeding Act, which came through in the United Kingdom in 2023, of course, with the full support of the NFU. But the reason I highlight it is that it's being talked about as a key tool for food security. And within the regulation section, they talk about regulating the food onto the market produced from precision-bred organisms. Now, they make it sound like this regulation is effectively a restriction here, saying that it cannot be done except in accordance with a marketing authorization, and finally, that they impose requirements for the purpose of securing traceability in relation to food or feed. Now, in its current iteration, of course, this is how it's looked at. It's as though it's to control this sort of food from going onto the market. It doesn't take much of a sea change before a decision that may be made could effectively turn it around, where in actual fact, this is the only food that is deemed suitable to be marketed. So I think that's something to be very wary of, particularly when one bears in mind what's been happening in Africa.
Yes, and the other point, Charles, about that legislation that needs to be mentioned is that while it says this is not genetic modification, they say that there is no introduction of, or there is no foreign genetic material in the final organism. That, of course, isn't entirely true. They're allowed to introduce foreign genetic modification in order to bring about a genetic mutation. They then have to remove the foreign genetic modification afterwards. They claim that this is all about doing in the laboratory or in the factory what can be done through selective breeding over a much longer timescale. They're simply shortening the timescales. This is not entirely true, and that piece of legislation is something we've been talking about for quite some time. And again, it needs to be an election issue, in my opinion. But anyway, we'll talk a bit more about that in extra. Now, let's have a look at this. This was in AP this morning. In Burkina Faso, a growing number of children are traumatized by war. And of course, Charles is talking about the Sahel. This is talking about the Sahel. I just want to remind everybody again about British interference in this part of the world. Not just British interference, French and US as well, but the French and the US are increasingly being kicked out of these parts of the world. But remind everybody of the Conflict, Security and Stability Fund. This is a big tranche of money that the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office issues every year. And when you look at its full name rather than its acronym of CSSF, they have a comma between the word conflict and the word stability. That comma is, in my opinion, absolutely misplaced, because this money is all about making conflict sustainable in these regions. So this is just one example going back to 2018 to 2021, £5 million in this case to be used in Mali, Niger, Chad and Burkina Faso. Now, if we look at Mali as an example, which is just north of Burkina Faso, we've seen that the government of Mali has been kicking out NGOs funded by France. But coming back to the CSSF, just have a look at the sort of number of projects. This is just in 1 year, all in the Sahel area. And of course, everywhere you go, everywhere you see this money go, you see conflict and you see disruption. This is Relief Web again. Charles already have them on the program. CSSF money going into stabilization of the Stabilization CSSF program. Stabilization activities in Niger, in this case, in support of the Nigerian government stabilization strategies. This is complete nonsense. So look at fcdospending.ukcolumn.org to get an idea of the amount of money that the FCDO does spend on these types of projects. Let's not forget that Tony Blair Institute for Global Change is absolutely excited about this region. Now, I know I'm just going to finish off by showing this short video clip. I know you've seen this before, but just a reminder of this. This is going back to 2018, when both Ursula von der Leyen, before she became president of the European Commission, was at the Munich Security Conference. Tony Blair was there as well on the sidelines and speaking in completely different settings, but on the same day, they made, it seems like, comments from the same script. Let's just remind ourselves.
First of all, our collective defense, we are ironclad committed to NATO. NATO of 29, that is collective defense Article 5. But there are problems and issues where I do not see NATO, but Europe has to be able to act.
That though this transatlantic alliance with America is extremely important and we need to maintain it, the best partnership is a partnership where we have our own capabilities that are also strong.
I was talking about Africa. This is not a typical place for NATO. We are very committed to NATO and other places, but Africa is a place where we need to be able to act as Europeans.
For example, one of the things that my institute does is work in Africa, and at the moment we're particularly focused on the Sahel group of countries. That's that band of countries across the north part of sub-Saharan Africa, where you've got exploding populations, dire poverty, radicalization and extremism. We may well face the next wave of migration and extremism from those countries. It makes perfect sense for Europe to have the military capability to help those countries with their security.
And for that, we created the European Defence Union to have a comprehensive approach with diplomacy, economic development, and the military means.
So, Vanessa, very briefly, CSSF money is going into these countries. These countries, rather than it bringing peace to these countries, it brings more conflict, it seems. And in the meantime, we've got the European Union seeing Africa as being its southern neighbourhood, and we've got the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change seeing it as being its playground. We gotta feel sorry for the people on the receiving end of all this.
Yeah, I mean, the CSSF, as I've always said, is basically there to secure perpetual war and instability, basically. And it's a fund which has zero transparency. Most people don't know, even within Parliament, where that money is being spent. For Tony Blair, I mean, I think what we're seeing at the moment is, rather than an arms race, we're seeing a commodity race. It's a race to control as much of the world's commodities as possible. And of course, Africa is high on the target list.
Yes, okay, thank you for that. Now, we're just going to end with a comment on the new currency, which has been released in the United Kingdom, because, of course, King Charles' head is now on the money, if we can put that on screen. And there it is. Doesn't it look fetching? Now, I realize this is possibly going to discourage the use of cash in this country, because who wants to walk around with his head in their pocket? But I would just say, this is just the bug we've got to bear in the meantime, until we can do something else and get somebody else in place of him. So please don't let it put you off using cash. We don't want to head into a cashless society. I think I would understand if it does cause reluctance, but we've got to fight these feelings and continue using cash. And we'll leave it there for today. No doubt we'll be talking a bit more about that in Extra as well. Thanks to everyone for joining us today. Thanks to Vanessa and Charles for taking part. We'll see you in a couple of minutes if you're a UK Column member for some Extra. Otherwise, 1 p.m. tomorrow for the interview with Clive de Carl, and we'll see you 1 p.m. on Friday for another UK Column News. See you then. Bye-bye.